who are blind, have low vision, or have another print disability, which makes reading, holding a book, or turning a page difficult or impossible. The content is copyrighted by the respective publishers. For more information, please visit us on the web at nfradioreading.org.
Hello, this is Jane, and for the next hour, I'll be reading from the January 24 through 25 issue of the Wall Street Journal Review on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. The first article I'll be reading is from the front page, and it is titled Back to the Age of Empires. From James Polk to Donald Trump, the White House revives a game of territorial expansion that treats foreign lands as real estate and their people as Americans in waiting. And there is a huge picture that is taken of Greenland, and underneath the photo it says, "The fate of Greenland remains in flux. But if the fight over what Trump calls a piece of ice tells us anything, it's that the post-World War II order is dead." Okay, so nobody this far north expected their ice-capped island to be the stage for a showdown over whether the 21st century will be a new age of empire. President Trump has backed down, for now, from his threats to use economic or military coercion to take over the Danish territory of Greenland. But few people in this seafront city are celebrating their tactical victory. The shock of the U.S.'s raw expansionist ambition still hangs in the air, like the gulls at Nuuk's harbor scouring the fishing boats for scraps of seal meat. What rankles most, say many Greenlanders, is that Trump treated their home, which he called a piece of ice, cold and poorly located, as a commodity. Dispensing with ideals of democratic self-determination and the taboo against territorial aggrandizement, the Trump administration has asserted a right to own other people's land based on the fact of American power. "This is our land, so we are not selling it, and everybody is saying that," said Sven Jensen, walking to Nuuk's harbor in search of day work. A Greenlandic flag stuck out of his backpack. It's unacceptable Trump's behavior. Nearby, a small band of protesters thronged the U.S. Embassy. Greenlandic staff scurried briskly into the building, looking ashamed to be working for America. Many Greenlanders note that Trump has made no attempt to justify American designs on their land in terms of their will or well-being. Surveys show overwhelming opposition to a U.S. takeover. "This is not only about us. This is actually about something much bigger," said Jens Frederick Nielsen, the 34-year-old prime minister leading Greenland through one of its strangest chapters. "It's about the world order, the principles we have built the world on, the Western Alliance on, that have kept the world safe for many, many years. That's nothing to gamble with." In the capitals of Europe, there is little confidence that transatlantic relations will return to normal, or that Trump won't revive his threats over Greenland eventually. The specifics of a deal touted by the president remain vague. Nielsen said Thursday he wasn't consulted on or aware of the terms of any agreement, if there was one. Trump has railed for years against the Pax Americana, the U.S.'s global hegemony after World War II, managed via alliances, arguing that allies exploited America. Europeans knew he would push them to spend more on defense, and many concurred. What they didn't see coming was the speed with which the White House pushed for a return to the 19th century, when ownership of territory went to the strong. The U.S., to the shock of its closest friends and the weary residents of snow-blanketed Nook, want to join Russia in the game of seizing foreign lands. The land he has, Jensen said of Trump, is that enough? As the World Economic Forum in Davos on Wednesday, with the elites of global business and politics hanging on his words, Trump made a series of telling comments about how he views the growth and decline of nations. He cast territorial expansion as a normal historical process and a game that the U.S. needs to win. Greenland will be obtained, he said. This is not only about us, this is actually about something much bigger. Jens Frederik Nielsen, Prime Minister of Greenland, just as we have acquired many other territories throughout our history, as many of the European nations have, they've acquired. There's nothing wrong with it. Some went in reverse, actually, if you look, he said, musing on Europe's colonial history. Some had great, vast wealth, great, vast lands all over the world. They went in reverse. They stuck back where they started. That happens too, but some grow. What he didn't mention, most territorial expansion in the Age of Empires was achieved through bloodshed, not purchase. And when money changed hands, it was sometimes under duress, as the victor in a war imposed a sale on the loser. In 1848, President James Polk forced Mexico to sell the U.S. a massive swath of territory, including California, Arizona, and New Mexico, for $15 million after the U.S. won the Mexican-American War. At the time, Americans mainly cheered that conquest, with the notable exception of a newly elected Congressman, Abraham Lincoln. Trump has had Polk's portrait hung in the Oval Office, telling visitors to the White House he got a lot of land. Often empires sold because they needed money to fight each other. Thus Napoleon offloaded French Louisiana to the U.S. in 1803, partly because he needed to fund his wars in Europe. Russia, economically weakened after losing the Crimean War, sold Alaska to the U.S. in 1867 for just $7.2 million. In that era, the people living on these traded lands were largely illiterate and cut out from political power by virtue of their race, including indigenous peoples in the Western Hemisphere. They and their lands were treated as objects. Greenland, with its 90% Inuit population, is acutely aware of this history. In Alaska, the first decades after U.S. rule brought disruption and hardship for indigenous people, including a loss of rights to land and resources. By the time they gained American citizenship and rights, most had lost their language and become some of the poorest citizens of a rich country. Native Alaskans' traumatic history helps explain Greenland's adamant opposition to an American takeover today. Every 2 years, teenagers from northern Canada, Alaska, and Greenland gather for Arctic Games, many of them descended from indigenous peoples who once spoke mutually intelligible languages. These days, Greenlanders are shocked by how few words their brethren can speak in their ancestral tongue, and by the poverty of Native Americans in Alaska. Their 16 and 18-year-olds from Canada, Alaska, said Ujamagag Engel, a local historian in Nuuk, and every time they're so overwhelmed by how fluent we are in our own culture and how modern we are. As the 20th century progressed, nation-states replaced empires. Borders, once merely the result of the most recent war, became etched in national identity. A new international order after World War II promised equal sovereignty for small and big countries alike. 2 world wars and the surge in destructive technology showed that industrial warfare had made territorial expansionism devastating. The atomic age made it potentially life-ending for humanity. Russian leader Vladimir Putin's seizure of Crimea in 2014 challenged the post-war taboo on annexation. German Chancellor Angela Merkel accused him of trying to turn back the clock. Putin, she told Germany's parliament, is acting according to the patterns of the 19th and 20th centuries in the 21st century. 12 years later, it's Merkel who appears to have been in the wrong century. The Trump administration has embraced the right of the strong to take land from the weak. By what right does Denmark assert control over Greenland? White House Deputy Chief of Staff Stephen Miller told CNN early this month. The United States is the power of NATO, he said, to secure the Arctic. Obviously, Greenland should be part of the United States. The U.S. has toppled regimes, invaded countries from Grenada to Iraq, and fought wars in Korea and Vietnam over where to draw the borders in those Cold War theaters. But not since 1903, the year Theodore Roosevelt coerced Colombia to relinquish what became the Panama Canal, has a U.S. president forced a foreign government to give Washington significant land. The canal, Trump said last year, should be America's again. If the White House wants to revive that ambition, America will have to get through the 57,000 people of Greenland first. Their quiet outrage meant that Denmark had to flatly reject a U.S. takeover. Denmark's defense of its territorial integrity, in turn, became a red line for Europe. Danish, French, and other European troops began deploying on Greenland. The island government is now requesting a permanent military presence. The unspoken reality, NATO troops are there to deter the U.S. The surreal prospect of U.S. and European allies shooting at each other on Greenland sent stock and bond markets sliding, arousing fears that European investors in U.S. government debt could back away. It was, for Trump, a crash course on why the 19th century is not so easily brought into the 21st. Ironically, it was Greenland's first experience under U.S. control during World War II that supercharged their claim to self-determination. First colonized by Scandinavian missionaries in 1721 and ruled by Denmark alone from 1814, Greenland was isolated from the world during the Age of Empire. Then, when Nazi Germany overran Denmark, Danish diplomats asked Washington to secure Greenland, which became a valuable refueling station for bombers and a source of minerals. American GIs brought swing records, Lucky Strike cigarettes, and the Sears Roebuck mail order catalog to Inuit residents who embraced the possibilities of 20th century life. A 14-year-old girl decorated a large boulder off Greenland's coast with the letters USA OK. Danes returning after the war found a population that wanted self-government. The U.S.-influenced counterculture of the 1960s inverted the social order, venerating indigenous folkways and fueling aspirations for full independence. Greenlanders won their own parliament in 1979 and achieved self-rule within the Danish kingdom in 2009. The same legislation said any decision to separate from Denmark would rest with the people of Greenland. Then came Trump, who turned the U.S. from an inspiration into a threat. When he proposed buying Greenland in his first term, locals took it as something between a joke and an insult. This time, the president, emboldened by his military interventions in Iran and Venezuela, has nobody in Greenland laughing. Nielsen's government this week asked residents to stockpile 5 days of food and water for an emergency and to write down the phone numbers of their loved ones and be ready to flee their homes if needed. The authorities didn't say what emergency they were preparing for. They didn't have to. By what right does Denmark assert control over Greenland? Stephen Miller, White House Deputy Chief of Staff. And I need to pause here just for a moment to remind you that you are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal Review on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. The next article I'm going to read is titled, "Why Do Some People Just Click?" You know it when you feel it with a coworker, friend, or stranger. The science of interpersonal synchrony explains how clicking can be a fast track to intimacy or drama. And this is by Kate Murphy. Say you're mingling at a cocktail party, networking event, singles mixer, or church reception. Some exchanges are pleasant enough. Others are taxing, if not downright painful. Then you get lucky and meet someone with whom you feel an instant connection. The conversation feels effortless. You find yourself saying things like yes and exactly. The encounter is affirming, uplifting, and fundamentally why you attended the event in the first place. The peculiar alchemy that causes us to click with some people and not with others, romantically or platonically, has been a preoccupation of poets for centuries, but it has only recently drawn the attention of scientists. Advances in biometric and brain scanning technology have given researchers startling new insights into what occurs when we socialize. Not only do we tend to mirror each other's movements, postures, facial expressions, and gestures, we also uncannily sync up our heart rates, blood pressure, pupil dilation, and hormonal activity. During meaningful conversations, there is an associated syncing or coupling of neural patterns or brain waves. You and the other person are, at that moment, of like minds. Neuroscientists call this coordinated movement and automatic activity interpersonal synchrony. You can think of it as a kind of spidey sense that flags whether someone is friend or foe, not to mention sexually compatible. What we're talking about is a much older, evolutionary, more animalistic way of understanding the social world, says Dr. Aliska Prokazovkova, a postdoctoral researcher at Cognitive Psychology Unit of Leiden University of the Netherlands. Indeed, it seems we are wired to perform a kind of deep-seated method acting in social situations, using information that doesn't need to be taken into consciousness, thought about, or inferred. Prochaskova says, by subconsciously mirroring even the subtlest twitches of expression and biological rhythms of other people, we can channel their thoughts and feelings. When we reflexively smile upon observing someone else's joy, we feel their happiness. Syncing with their racing heartbeat makes us feel their anxiety. The downside is that we can sometimes get so swept up in other people's drama, anger, or fear that we lose sight of where others end and we begin. So, what to make of all this? Given the dynamic, subconscious, and automatic nature of interpersonal synchrony, we should all probably give ourselves a break if, unlike Will Rogers, we cannot claim to like everyone we meet. While we should all try to be courteous and get along, part of maturity is realizing that you won't click with everyone. And that's okay. In fact, it's the natural order of things. That's why when you do click with someone, it's so special and you should pay attention and cultivate that relationship. Too often, people spend time with friends or frenemies out of habit, convenience, or social positioning, perhaps drinking too much or laughing too loud to mask the lack of synchrony. Or they just don't think about how people make them feel, which we now know goes well beyond emotional effects. To greater or lesser degrees, we become the people with whom we socialize. If I'm syncing with you, my prediction error is minimalized, says Dr. Oliver Saunders Wilde, an interpersonal synchrony researcher affiliated with MIT's Affective Computing Group. When we are out of sync, he says, we experience it as a kind of judder or twinge of social discomfort, which is your brain working a little harder to fix predictions that are wrong. As a result, the interaction feels and actually is more laborious. While not everyone has great emotional awareness, most of us can readily distinguish between someone who is hard to be around versus easy to be around. In the latter case, you and the other person are literally on the same wavelength. But you can also sync too much, such as when your spouse's stress makes you feel stressed, and together you climb a ladder of agitation until there is an epic blow-up, leaving you both confused over how things spun so horribly out of control. The trick in these situations is to become aware of how you might be unwittingly mirroring the other person's anger, outrage, or anxiety, and in effect snap out of it. Easier said than done, because when we embody another, their emotions, tensions truly feel like our own. But if you can catch yourself doing things as simple as deepening your breathing, changing your posture, and relaxing your facial and shoulder muscles can help change the rhythm of the encounter. In many cases, the other person will pull back too, and maybe even start syncing to you. Synchrony researcher and psychotherapist Dr. Richard Palumbo advises imagining there is a mute button during particularly fraught interactions, so you focus less on the words used and more on the other person's level of arousal and how you might be matching that energy. It's your natural human tendency to sync with someone else, he says. What's not so natural is being aware of it. Sometimes we need to disconnect to recalibrate and reclaim ourselves. The relationships that endure, however, are the ones where you are in sync more than you are not. Grace is learning to ride the tide. This essay was adapted from Kate Murphy's new book, Why We Click: The Emerging Science of Interpersonal Synchrony, which will be published by Celadon Books and on January 27. We're talking about an older, evolutionary, more animalistic way of understanding the social world. And the next article is titled, it's under Science Shorts. Scientists can track space debris with sonic booms. Objects in orbit pose a risk when they fall to Earth. A new study outlines a method to track crash sites, and fallout zones. And this is by Aylin Woodward. Tens of thousands of human-like objects orbiting the Earth human-made objects orbiting the Earth could pose a risk to life, infrastructure, and the environment when they fall through the atmosphere. Typically, the space debris is tracked using ground-based or orbital radar and optical instruments, but these methods struggle to monitor objects when they begin burning up in the atmosphere, hurtling toward the ground at speeds of 17,000 miles an hour. Sometimes re-entry predictions can be off by thousands of miles. In a new study, 2 scientists have outlined a way to track space debris crash sites and fallout zones using the sonic booms that occur when such objects streak through the atmosphere. Vibrations from the booms, the shock waves produced by something traveling faster than the speed of sound, can be picked up by ground-based stations typically used to monitor for earthquakes, helping researchers calculate an object's speed, trajectory, and potential fallout zone. The approach offers additional clues about whether an object might have broken up during its fall. It's rapid re-entry forensics, said Konstantinos Charalambos, a planetary seismologist at Imperial College London and co-author of a study detailing the method published Thursday in the journal Science. Though space debris usually breaks up during re-entry, pieces can survive, and these potentially toxic, flammable, or even radioactive fragments might need to be tracked down and disposed of, said Benjamin Fernando, a seismologist at Johns Hopkins University and study co-author. To demonstrate their idea, the scientists looked at data from more than 1,000 earthquake monitoring seismometers on the ground around the southwestern U.S. to study the sonic boom from debris of the Chinese Shenzhou 15 spacecraft as it re-entered Earth's atmosphere in April 2024. When that shock wave hit, it shook the ground. Monitoring stations close to the debris' path recorded the vibrations more quickly, while stations farther afield recorded a delay. The pattern of the recordings helped the scientists to estimate the craft's re-entry path, which passed over tens of millions of Americans between the Southern California coast and Las Vegas. The new method doesn't offer people on the ground advance warning of debris falling, Fernando said. This object is always going to outrun its own sonic boom, meaning you'll see it and it will hit you before you hear it, he said. Rather, he said, it could help researchers quickly find where the debris has landed and how big it is, or confirm whether it has burned up in the atmosphere. Over the last decade, the number of spacecraft, such as dead satellites or used rocket stages, that re-enter Earth's atmosphere from orbit has grown exponentially. As re-entries become more frequent, tracking the objects becomes more important. We're at a point now where this problem is getting worse and worse, but the tracking and response aspect that we're working on here has not actually caught up with the reality, he said. And I'm going to, not time yet. Well, before I start the next article, I am going to do that. I'm going to remind you that you're listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal review on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. All right, the next article is titled, Can the Beckhams Brand Survive Their Family Feud? And this, along with this article, is a picture of the entire Beckham family, David and Victoria, along with their children and their spouses, if they have one. Okay, in a series of social media posts, the eldest child of David and Victoria Beckham threw stones at the image of a perfect family. And this is by Sam Schub and Chevy Lieber. David Beckham was at the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland on Tuesday with Bank of America Chief Executive Brian Moynihan to promote their new partnership. But all anyone wanted to talk about was his son. After the obligatory questions about business and the World Cup, a host on CNBC's Squawk Box lobbed Beckham an out-of-left-field query about how young people can preserve their mental health in the age of social media. Children are allowed to make mistakes, Beckham, 50, said. That's how they learn. So that's what I try to teach my kids. But you have to sometimes let them make those mistakes as well. Just a day earlier, his 26-year-old son, Brooklyn Beckham, had posted a series of accusations about his soccer-famous father and pop star turned fashion designer mother, Victoria Beckham. He said that his parents had controlled him for years, lied about him to the press, and sought to damage his relationship with his wife, Nicola Peltz Beckham. Their goal, he said, was to affect the image of a, quote, perfect family, unquote. My family values public promotion and endorsements above all else, he wrote on Instagram. Brand Beckham comes first. That brand has been burnished over decades of professional triumphs, tabloid scandals, and slick deal-making. Recently, both David and Victoria Beckham put their legacies on screen in docuseries that cast them as hardworking entrepreneurs and devoted parents. Their image appeared stronger than ever. Now, their firstborn child is throwing stones. Representatives for David Beckham, Victoria Beckham, and Brooklyn Beckham did not respond to requests for comment. A representative for Nicola Peltz Beckham declined to comment. In the UK, the Beckhams are as close as you can get to royalty without sharing Windsor DNA. David is perhaps the most famous English player in soccer history, while Victoria parlayed her Spice Girl fames into a career as a respected fashion designer. Their partnership was forged in the cauldron of the 1990s celebrity gossip, with their every move in their careers, their bumpy personal lives, and their adventurous senses of personal style subject to tabloid scrutiny. They were Taylor Swift and Travis Kelce before Taylor Swift and Travis Kelce, said Elaine Liu, founder of the website Laney Gossip. Over time, the couple became savvy managers of their own brand, a sprawling modern empire including a professional soccer team, fashion and beauty lines, investment deals, and commercial partnerships. In recent years, they each released a Netflix docuseries, Beckham in 2023 and Victoria Beckham in 2025, featuring scenes from their private life. Brooklyn and Nicola appear in David's series, but not in Victoria's. The way they've performed their celebrity has been togetherness, Liu said, appearing and engaging with the world as a happily married couple in both relative calm amid scandal. And as their family grew, their 4 children became smiling ambassadors for brand Beckham, too. Until Monday night. In a series of Instagram story posts, Brooklyn accused his parents of trying endlessly to ruin his marriage to Nicola, an actress and model, and the daughter of billionaire investor Nelson Peltz. Brooklyn declared, "I do not want to reconcile with my family." Where Victoria and David seemed to see press scrutiny as part of the job, Brooklyn and Nicola are operating in a manner more typical of their own generation. Brooklyn's posts call to mind the no-contact boundaries some children have enforced with their parents in recent years, to much pop psych chatter. Andrew Friedman, managing director of crisis communications at Orchestra, said he'd advised many clients through family drama. Going public, he said, should be a last resort. He's also warned clients that using social media to air grievances opens a can of worms. Nuance is not welcome in social media feeding frenzies, Friedman said. Sensational and unusual details will overshadow the central issue. Brooklyn, the eldest of the Beckhams' 4 children, has built a following in his parents' image, though without the benefit or burden of a steady career. He's worked as a model, photographer, cooking show host, and most recently founded a hot sauce brand. Brooklyn and Nicola went public with their relationship in 2020 and married in a lavish 2022 ceremony at her family estate in Palm Beach, Florida. Rumors of a family feud flared almost immediately after the wedding, including whispers about the fact that Nicola didn't wear a dress made by her fashion designer mother-in-law. Brooklyn on Monday recounted further grievances related to a mother-son dance and the seating chart. In the months and years that followed, celebrity journalists and fans closely tracked both generations of the family, looking for cracks in the relationship. But official dispatches from Beckham World suggested that things were just fine. In a scene from the final episode of David's Netflix series, the Beckham family, including Brooklyn and Nicola, joke around on a visit to their country home. It's a picture of familial bliss. We've tried to give our children the most normal upbringing as possible, but you've got a dad that was England captain and a mom that was posh spice, David says in voiceover, and they could be little S S. And they're not. And that's why I say I'm so proud of my children, and I'm so in awe of my children, the way they've turned out. Above, the entire Beckham clan, and that's the picture they're describing. So that's that. The next article is titled, "In my 40s, I found out I have ADHD. Maybe you do, too. You're not imagining things. More adults, especially women, are being diagnosed with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder." This is by Catherine Binley. They say one way to grab someone's attention is with a startling piece of data. So get this. 4 women were having espresso martinis in San Francisco this past fall. 3 were diagnosed with ADHD, or attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, as adults. The 4th just assumes she has it. Are you, or is someone you know, so ADD? Welcome to the club. I don't actually endorse membership. I say this as someone who learned a year ago, in my 40s, that I have ADHD. Though I sometimes say I'm neurodivergent, since it sounds cooler than having a disorder that affects my attention, my emotions, and where my keys, credit card, and driver's license are at any given moment. Actual statistics on ADHD are indeed pretty staggering. A 2024 survey found that 25% of adults suspect they have it. The fastest growing cohort being diagnosed is adult women. From 2020 to 2022, the diagnosis rate nearly doubled among women aged 23 to 49. So our doctors just out there ripping Adderall and Vyvanse scripts off their little pads and tossing them up into the air like confetti? Are Instagram algorithms poisoning the masses by rattling off symptoms associated with ADHD that most people have to some extent, like having a hard time motivating to do laundry? Social media is one of the most commonly used sources for mental health information. Posts about ADHD on TikTok have been viewed somewhere in the neighborhood of 28 billion times. One study found half of the most popular ADHD videos on the platform were misleading. Maybe, as certain people have suggested to me, we're all a little ADD. Some researchers have moved away from considering ADHD a fixed condition and look at it as existing on a continuum. After a year of reading books, listening to podcasts, and meeting with various medical professionals, I can say this. Most people have a pretty poor understanding of ADHD, my former self included. I'd always found the frenetic energy of ADHD people annoying. Oops, but once you learn what ADHD is and the brain functions it affects, you start to understand why so many people, especially women, are overlooked and only find out when their children are being evaluated. My own diagnosis came under stranger circumstances, on vacation, in a shared van going from Mexico City to San Miguel de Allende. After 2 hours of silence, boredom kicked in. So I struck up a conversation with Jane, a clinical psychologist from Toronto. Eventually, we dug into my love life. She noticed I seemed sensitive to rejection. Does anyone like being rejected, I wonder? No, but my sensitivity sounded more intense. Had I ever been evaluated for ADHD? I think I laughed out loud. I'd noticed the impact of technology on my attention, but I'd always thought of myself as overly focused, fixated on things even. I once stayed up until 2 a.m. reading Ted Kennedy's testimony about what happened at Chappaquiddick, and that was after I spent hours solving the Martha Moxley murder. I now know the psychological term for this intensity is hyperfocus, and it's common in people with ADHD. I Googled ADHD symptoms back at my hotel. The initial results didn't describe me. Difficulty holding down a job, impulsive, unfinished projects, car accidents, a life of chaos. Then there was an eerily familiar portion. Indecisiveness, losing things, frequently late, forgets appointments, impatient, hyperverbal, intense emotions. The evaluation I scheduled when I got back home was illuminating. My verbal and pattern recognition skills were off the charts, but my working memory and attention were at the low end of average. This lopsidedness, coupled with answers to some 500 personality and behavioral questions, indicated neurodivergence. Researchers have yet to determine the exact causes of ADHD, but studies show a substantial genetic vulnerability, and the condition often runs in families. Typical ADHD behavior teachers look out for in kids. It includes fidgeting, running around, not listening, and not sitting still. In other words, traits you'd associate with a restless boy. Today, researchers know that ADHD often presents differently in girls, who are more likely to be found staring out a window, daydreaming. I was more the type to interrupt class with jokes, but I rarely got in trouble. Girls are better at boys than at masking their symptoms, according to my neuropsych report. My charming personality helped with this. In clinical studies of children, the male to female diagnosis ratio is approximately 3-to-1. In adult populations, some studies show near equal prevalence. As students age and academics become more challenging, kids with ADHD tend to start falling behind. Girls with ADHD are often told they aren't trying hard enough. They take that as an indictment on their intelligence and their work ethic. They might procrastinate, struggle to finish projects, or seem unable to manage basic tasks. Many develop the belief that they're failures who never lived up to their potential. ADHD is not only often mistaken as anxiety or depression, providers believe it often leads to anxiety and depression when it goes undiagnosed. I did well in school through a master's degree and then found professional success in a career full of novelty and deadlines, which are great for those with my attention predisposition. But I didn't make it out unscathed. It turns out believing that your tendency to overthink, talk too fast, and interrupt are character flaws, proof of a tactlessness that you're not just disciplined enough to overcome, as opposed to traits baked into your neurobiology, isn't great for your self-esteem. This brings me to what so few people seem to know about ADHD. It isn't about a deficit of attention. It's about your brain's ability to regulate where your attention goes. You want to follow verbal instructions, but your brain bounces to something else. You want to zip the pocket with your car key in it before you leave for a 6-mile run in February in Colorado. But your working memory is poor, so you lose the key, get locked out, and have a brush with hypothermia. You know to turn the faucet in the bathroom off while rinsing out your swimsuit, but something distracts you. That's why there's a pool of water collecting on the floor. You're not some careless, aloof fool. Your behavior, at times, just very closely resembles that of a careless, aloof fool. And I just need to stop one more time quickly to remind you you're listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal Review on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Now back to the article on ADHD. There's also overlap between ADHD and sensory sensitivity. Noises, lights, even the tag on your sweater can be uncomfortable or distracting. At brunch with my sister, I suddenly interrupted about a nearby diner. My God, that person's texts are driving me insane. Why won't they silence their phone? I couldn't focus on our conversation amid the dinging. Huh, she replied. She hadn't noticed. Ding? Oh, that. Yeah, now I hear it. ADHD minds could be thought of as like the inside of a pinball machine. The ball is darting around off flippers and bumpers. Neurotypical people are rolling a bowling ball down an alley. The reward system of the ADHD brain is also screwy. Boring tasks like dishes or returning a package at UPS, where there is always a line, can require Herculean effort. Then there's the emotional component. People with ADHD have a harder time regulating their feelings. Many of us suffer from cognitive impulsivity or a difficulty with pausing. That might look like blurting out things or firing off a text that should be slept on. Rejection sensitivity is also linked to ADHD. That's what ultimately tipped Jane off during our van ride. Since my diagnosis, I've lost count of how many women I've met who found their diagnosis life-changing. Providers often recommend therapy, mindfulness, exercise, an executive functioning coach to help with organization and time management, and of course, medication, including stimulants. It's that last one people tend to find the game changer. Their lives are finally organized, their ability to focus manageable, their souls comforted, knowing all along there was an explanation for their struggles. My own experience didn't look like that. I was devastated, ashamed even, to learn that my brain, the thing responsible for my intellect, which I pride myself on, was defective. I became determined to obliterate my ADHD out of existence. I failed, hard and fast. As my attempts at behavioral modifications didn't stick, I tried medication, hoping it would help me focus and calm my mind, turning me into one of those people who doesn't lose it when she gets cut off in traffic. Med after med didn't work. But over time, my immunity to stimulant meds pretty much confirmed something interesting happened. I started to believe maybe God was trying to tell me something. My brain is different in some ways that are good and some ways that are bad. I'm responsible for managing the parts of my ADHD that negatively impact my life, like my overthinking or my struggle to pause. That work is hard and it's ongoing. But I'm coming around to the idea that I'm meant to be this way. Maybe instead of being endlessly distractible, I'm someone who notices everything. Maybe instead of being reactive, I tend to radiate authenticity. Or maybe, I swear I had another example, but I lost my train of thought. Forgive me, I really do have ADHD. From 2020 to 2022, the diagnosis rate nearly doubled among women aged 23 to 49. And that's the end of that article. And the next article is titled, What Does It Take to Play an Artistic Genius? This is by John Jurgensen. Paul Mescal starts his turn as William Shakespeare in an erotic mood. In the film Hamnet, which builds to the first staging of Hamlet, the bard is still a bored Latin tutor when he encounters his future wife, played by Jessie Buckley, with a bird of prey on her arm. Within moments, they're kissing in a barn. Put a hawk in a scene and it's immediately hot to me, Mescal jokes. The Irish actor, known for playing soulful men in literary dramas, is carving out a specialty in portraying cultural giants. Following Hamnet, which garnered 8 Oscar nominations this week, including Best Picture, Mescal will appear next as Paul McCartney in a biopic project directed by Sam Mendes. 4 films scheduled for 2028, each centered on a different member of the Beatles. Mescal prepared to play Shakespeare by writing poetry. To embody McCartney, the right-handed actor learned to play guitar lefty. That homework was a part of a deeper process of breaking down the compulsions and frustrations all artists share, which makes me feel less insane when I'm having a tough day on set. I'm like, okay, pretty sure Paul McCartney had some tough days in the studio, and look what he made. Mescal was raised in Maynooth, northwest of Dublin. After competing in Gaelic football, he transitioned from athletics to acting and later graduated from the drama school at Trinity College, Dublin. Prominent stage roles in Dublin and London primed him for a breakout role in 2020 in the limited series adaptation of Sally Rooney's Normal People. In the angsty romance, he played a popular working-class boy in a secret relationship with a wealthy social misfit. Mescal, who had performed in productions of Romeo and Juliet and Macbeth as a drama student, says it seemed almost obligatory for an aspiring actor to love Shakespeare. It's always felt like I would have to go and be like, that was an amazing production, and actually I didn't have a clue what the production was trying to communicate about the play. Hamnet is adapted from a novel by Maggie O'Farrell, who co-wrote the screenplay with director Chloe Zhao. The pair are nominated for Best Adapted Screenplay, while Zhao and Buckley both received Oscar nods for directing and acting, respectively. To the surprise of many, Mescal was not nominated for Best Supporting Actor. The first scenes between Buckley and Mescal create some of the most romantic movie moments of the year and lead to some of the saddest. Before Hamnet filmed, a trial run of the actors' barn tryst served as a test of their on-camera chemistry. That audition was incredibly exhilarating and, like, physical and really sexy, Mescal said. The characters' connection had to support the weight of everything that followed, including the death of one of the couple's 3 children, a storyline that made Hamnet a tough sell for some potential viewers, especially parents, unsure if they could stomach the familial grief in the movie. Mescal gets it. He made a movie that makes people ugly cry, but he wishes it wasn't the biggest talking point about the film. It's very easy for people to discuss the fact that it's a film about grief, which of course it is, but it's not just that, and never was to us when we were filming it. In real life, Shakespeare had a son named Hamnet, who died at age 11 in 1596, several years before the tragedy of Hamlet, Prince of Denmark, premiered in the Globe Theatre. The movie imagines Shakespeare processing the loss of his son into art. In Hamnet, the staging of Hamlet creates a moment of catharsis for everyone assembled inside the Globe, not just because they're smitten with Shakespeare's pretty words. His real gift is what he was willing to share with us as an artist, the private corners of his heart and mind that he shares with us religiously in all of his play, Mescal says. That's, to me, why we're talking about him 400 years on. I just got a couple minutes left. I can just read. There's one, they sometimes feature obituaries for famous people who passed on, and this one is Frank Craighill, co-founder of a sports marketing powerhouse. As a lawyer, he helped some of the biggest athletes earn more and sometimes urged them to spend less. And he was born in 1939 and died in 2025. After earning a law degree in 1964, Frank Craighill roamed through Africa and Asia, returned home broke, and found himself bored with the routines of a junior lawyer in Washington, D.C. His law school roommate and friend, Donald Dell, proposed an alternative, representing pro athletes in negotiations for endorsement deals, then an emerging business whose best-known player was Mark H. McCormick, the founder of International Management Group, IMG. Dell, who had been a successful captain of the U.S. Davis Cup tennis team, had the contacts needed to make his idea work, but it was Craighill, who died of Parkinson's disease on December 25 at the age of 86, who had the managerial skills. He was calm, steady, diplomatic. He conveyed a sense of decency and integrity, Dell said. In 1970, they formed a firm eventually known as ProServe and attracted clients including tennis players Arthur Ashe and Stan Smith, baseball pitcher Tommy John, and basketball stars Moses Malone and Buck Williams. Let's see. In 1983, Craighill and another partner, Lee Fentress, were increasingly clashing with Dell on how to run ProServe. Dell was a very talented guy, but he was also a dominant guy and pushed to get his own way. And said Dell, who considered Craighill his best friend, said he may have been too demanding at times, but tried to preserve their friendship. Instead, Craighill and Fentress bolted to create their own firm, Advantage International, whose clients included football quarterback Dan Marino and tennis stars Steffi Graf and Jimmy Connors. Interpublic Group bought Advantage in 1997, renamed it Octagon. We've been the beneficiary of an explosion in the world of sports, Craighill told the Washington Times that year. It's kind of like we got on this wonderful wave, and we've been riding the crest for 15 years. And I have to end with, you've been listening to a reading of articles and features from the January 24 and 25 Wall Street Journal Review. We read from the Wall Street Journal Review every Thursday at 7 p.m. Your reader has been Jane. Thank you for listening.
Coming up next in the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service, we have the New York Times. Following that at 9 o'clock is Fortune Magazine. At 10 o'clock with episode number 8 of The Proving Ground by Michael Connolly. Stay with us for these readings and more. If you or people you know shop at any of the Dash's supermarkets, please save Dash's register tapes for radio reading. Our agency receives $2 for every $100 in Dash's register tapes. Radio reading has raised thousands of dollars so far. Anyone can drop off their Dash's tapes to the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service at 1199 Harlem Road, Cheektowaga, between William and Clinton Streets. Or Dash's tapes can be mailed to the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service at 1199 Harlem Road, Cheektowaga, New York, 14227. Any questions on Dash's tapes for radio reading? Call us at 716-821-5555, and thanks for caring. The following program is intended for listeners who are blind, have low vision,